I've never had stage fright in my life except for that day. And because my grandfather was there, and it's like, he called it. Here I am.
Hello and welcome to the Keyboard Chronicles, a podcast for keyboard players. I'm your host, David Holloway, and I'm thrilled as always to be here with you. I'm particularly thrilled to introduce our guest for this episode, Mr. Scott May. As you'll hear in this interview, wow, what a career Scott has had, and a very diverse career. So we talk about the use of theatre organs, being a radio sidekick and playing spontaneous music, through to Scott's work with the amazing band Ides of March. You name it, we cover it. And what's even better is Scott is a funny guy to boot, and was an absolute pleasure to talk to. I know we say that about all guests, and it's always true, but particularly true in your case, Scott. It was just great. So, yeah, I think you'll enjoy this interview a great deal, and I'll talk to you after the show. Scott, how are you, sir? It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm damn glad to be here. And boy, Australia, I've never been there. I wish I could go there sometime.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll get you here one day. And as I can tell by your attire that it's nice and summery in the US at the moment.
It's about 30 degrees here right now, and they're expecting an ice storm, but it's not going to hit us apparently that hard. But it's you know what? And it was 50 degrees yesterday, so
yeah,
there you
go.
Dennis DeYoung from Styx, he did a song once, and they said, people ask him why he lives in Chicago. He says, I like the weather. So,
yeah, it's Chicago. They call the Windy City, isn't it? That's right.
Yeah, it's windy, but it had nothing to do with the wind. It had to do with our politicians and all the hot air that they.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, that's where the Windy City.
See, I've already learned something. This is brilliant. I did not realise that. Scott, I thought we'd kick off just talking about your last 12 months. We're absolutely going to delve deeper into your history, but just tell us, what have you been up to the last year, and particularly with your current band, the Ides of March? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, this year we celebrate 60 years together with all the original guys.
That's amazing.
I'm the new guy. I've only been with them for 36 years. And but we're all from a little town in Chicago here called Berwyn. I grew up with these guys. They're a little bit older than I am, but they were always heroes because they were a garage band that all of a sudden hit it real big. And then our lead singer, Jim Peterick, started a band called Survivor. He wrote The Eye of the Tiger. He co-wrote all the 38 special hits, 20 million albums later. And, but his home base is the Ides of March. And so we've done shows. Actually, last year in March, on the Ides of March, we did a show with the Symphony Orchestra. As you know, that was our 60th anniversary celebration. And, so we just got off of a cruise. We were in the Caribbean with the concerts at sea. I get February, we got some shows, but March, then we go out with the Rock and Romance cruise. And so we're always busy.
Absolutely. And so what does an Ides of March gig look like now? What's sort of the gamut of music that you cover in a show? And, I mean, it's no mean feat. 60 years is an incredible feat. So tell us what, a gig today looks like for you when you do go out.
Well, it's an 8-piece band, 2 guitars, bass drums, and a 3-piece horn section. And all the material we do, every song in our set has been a top 10 hit, because we do our hits, and then we do a bunch of Survivor stuff and a bunch of 38 special stuff. Sometimes we do the song Heavy Metal from the Heavy Metal movie that Jim wrote with Sammy Hagar. So it's a rockin' show, and it goes everything from beautiful a cappella, not country, but a cappella vocals piece. We have a couple of those we do because we have 5-part harmony, all the way up to, pretty hard rock and all points in between.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so obviously to do that diverse a material, your rig must need to cover a lot of bases. So, I mean, how do you approach, covering that amount of material? What's your keyboard rig for a gig with Ides of March?
It's amazingly simple. I play a Hammond SKX Pro, double manual, and that's got everything in it. Lots of Hammond organ. The band is always, keyboards have pretty much centered around B3 and piano. And then I also have one of Marcus Rush's digital Mellotrons. I'm a Mellotron fanatic. So I've got the SKX Pro and my Mellotron, and then one lone little rack mount thing that sits in back of me that I have only because I use an orchestra hit, that big flonk at the very end of Eye of the Tiger, the very last note of the night. Dun 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 plank with the orchestra hit, and so I carry that, but everything's in the two keyboards, and it served me real well all this time, and I've been using Hammond stuff for a long time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We're definitely going to talk about that for sure, because as you know, it's a theme throughout your whole career. So let's jump back a decade or four, Scott, and talk about your musical upbringing. I loved the fact that when we're doing my research that you cited two things as making a big difference: a copy of Pipe Organ Magic by Jesse Crawford. And then I went down this rabbit hole, Scott, of looking at Leon Berry and his glockenspiels, traps, and plenty of pipes, and the fact that he was known as the dean of roller rink rock. I just loved. I was listening to this yesterday, that album. So just tell us about your musical upbringing, those two things, but also just broadly how you got into music as a youngster.
I started when I was very young. I used to watch the Lawrence Welk Show with my grandfather. And I would watch Jerry Burke play the Hammond B3 on that thing, and it fascinated me, and the sound of the organ fascinated me. And at home, I would take two pillows and put them up on the side of the couch, and I'd sit there and I'd do this. My mother, what are you doing? I go, I'm playing the organ, like I see on TV. And she says, well, would you like to take organ lessons? Now, this is back in 1961, a long time ago. And I said, sure. And so I started to take lessons with a gal named Dorothy Banyard. And she was the last of the great lady nightclub organists in Chicago. Back in the day, in the late 50s and 60s, a lot of nightclubs would have, instead of a band, they'd have a Hammond organ behind the bar up, and there would be ladies that would play the Hammond organ, play pop tunes. And they would wear skirts that just go down to the knees, and then they would kick pedals, and it was all lit up, and people used to like to see that. And they would talk, and Dorothy was the last of the great of ladies like that in Chicago. And so I did not have a classical upbringing. I was brought up on the Great American Songbook, George Gershwin, Cole Porter, Irving Berlin, all the great American songs. Well, when I got my first organ, grandfather gave me glockenspiel. Gave me Jesse Crawford Pipe Organ Magic, and an album of Ashley Miller playing the Radio City Music Hall organ. And when you ask me later about the worst thing that ever happened to me on stage, I'll bring more about that, but docket that. Radio City Music Hall was listening. And then my uncle gave me these 4 10-inch records of glockenspiels, traps, and plenty of pipes. But it was theater pipe organ, and that became a huge influence for me from that day. And now here we are, 60 plus years later. I'm still a fanatic for the theater pipe organ. Down in Australia, you guys got some cool pipe organs down there, theater organs down there.
There is the odd one. Yeah, that's right. I mean, in the UK and Australia, and obviously in America, there's the amazing ones that you've just mentioned. And Scott, you can educate me, and probably my listeners would be able to, and viewers too. I meant to look up what's the traps? What glockenspiels and pipes? I obviously understand. What is a trap?
Sure. Well, in the theater pipe organs, don't forget those organs were invented to accompany silent movies, and all those organs had drums and cymbals, castanets, wood blocks, triangles. They called it the toy counter, and so that if you're playing, that you could put some drums or a bass drum or snare drum or cymbals, or accent, and on glockenspiels, traps, and plenty of pipes. That was Leon Barry playing the Hub roller rink organ, and in the roller rinks they always used all those percussions because it was, people like to see it. They were all exposed, and Leon would play, and you could see the drumsticks hitting the drums and the bass drum thing, and it was very prominent. So that was the trap drums. They
Gotcha.
don't use that. They don't use that term too much nowadays, but trap drums is a drum set. It's an antiquated term.
See, that's two things I've learned. I can't keep up with the pace, Scott. It's brilliant. And so, yeah, I can see how they were huge influences. And so what led from that to you had the organ lessons to you moving into a more career focus with music?
I didn't listen to rock and roll when I was a kid at all. I had a beatnik uncle who, I was into the theater pipe organ, and then I had my beatnik uncle. When I started to play the organ, he turned me on to jazz right away, and Jimmy Smith and Groove Holmes and Brother Jack McDuff and Dr. Lonnie Smith, and all the great jazz organists. So I listened to jazz, and then when I was in a theater group between 8th grade and freshman year, and I met some guys and girls. I discovered girls in rock and roll on the same day. Precipitous meeting there. But I got into rock and roll, and I had one of the first guys I met when I was in high school was a drummer and his older brother. They were really into music, and they turned me on to Vanilla Fudge, Iron Butterfly, the Moody Blues, the Rascals, and this brand new band at that time called Led Zeppelin. The first three, Iron Butterfly, the Rascals, and Vanilla Fudge, those were all heavy organ records, and they became like my holy and very cool that now, all these years later, all the guys in the Vanilla Fudge are some of my dearest friends. Felix Cavalieri from the Rascals is one of my dearest friends, and the guys in the Moody Blues have been friends too. So I've been very lucky to have met most of my idols and become friends with them. But all that stuff, then I got in a band, and when you get in a band in 1968, we were all nuts back then. It was going to be, well, we're going to be stars. And then you realize that being a star is not, once you start to know some rock and roll stars, they got a lot of headaches. They got a lot of money. But I've been very lucky to have so far lived a life with a lot of freedom. I don't have any money, but I've got great friends, and I get by. This is not a tenement I'm living in here. And I've got a car that works, and I'm obviously well fed.
It's lies, folks. He is on a park bench. That's a virtual background. I saw
That's
it before we started recording.
Really. I want to buy a pencil. I started being bands right away with that fellow that I met, and never stopped. Here I am. Well, actually, I did stop. We could talk about that when I went into the comedy world.
Well, actually, let's do that now, Scott, because, and it sort of links because I know there was still a musical aspect of it. So let's talk about Judy Tenuta for a little while. Is that a fair sort of segue in there?
Well, I was in bands all through high school and out of high school and into college. I was a couple of the bands were pretty popular here in Chicago. We came close to getting signed, but it never happened. And I said if I turned 30 years old and I hadn't made it in the music world, I was going to give it up and make it a hobby and try and be an adult, which I failed miserably at. Because when I turned 30, a chance meeting with the comic Emo Phillips, I got to know Judy Tenuta, and she needed a music director. And so I went and I started working with her, and through her, all these other things started falling into place. And, Judy was really hot at the time, and we worked all over from the Fillmore West to Radio City Music Hall and North and South and, East and West. I did a bunch of shows with her, lots. And I made my first appearance on a major record album with her on Electro Records. And I produced her third album, which was Grammy nominated. We lost to Jonathan Winters. And if you're going to lose to somebody, lose to Jonathan Winters. We've got good news and bad news. What's the bad news? We lost. What's the good news? We lost to Jonathan Winters. And everybody goes, well, of course you did.
Yeah, exactly.
Although Jonathan Winters told Judy he voted for our record.
Oh, there you go. That's good. And Scott, tell us about your role with Judy as far as from a musical viewpoint. What was your actual role there? What were you pulling off for her each show?
I was known as Shadrach, her musical slave. I didn't even get to use my real name. Judy made nicknames for everybody.
It can happen.
It can happen. Worship me, pig. No, I had equipment. I had a tape machine, and a keyboard, and I would play cues to her, sound effects, and then I had tracks that I made of her songs, and then she would sing, and sometimes I was the scapegoat for jokes, but I would accompany her live, and Judy she would go, and I would follow her, and that led to so many other things in the comedy world and in radio and in TV. I couldn't have planned it better. And my age 30, no rock and roll. I'm going to get it out. Well, that went right out the window because now I'm doing comedy gigs.
That's right. And you ended up as a musical director, didn't you, Scott, at the Funny Firm?
The number one comedy club, number one most progressive comedy club in the United States. Chicago had a great comedy scene. A lot of great comics came out of Chicago. But the Funny Firm was known for being one of the places where anything goes. Everybody liked to work at the Funny Firm because it was owned by a comedian, and I did live music there every night, and I did a lot of work with the comics, and I got to work with so many comedians. And trust me, in comedy, timing is everything. And when you work with experienced comics who are really good, you learn timing, you learn drama, you learn when to put the little zinger in, call it back later. And especially in Chicago, we've got a big improv community here. And we had a great improv group that I was their music guy. And we'd have to make it all up on the road, on the run, because we would get suggestions from the audience, Chicago style improv. We'd have to make it all up right away. And
so tell me about that, Scott, because I'm fascinated by that. So when you were MD, so you had a band at the club?
Well, we had me.
Yeah, it was you. Yep.
Yeah, and I had, I had a computer, and I had tracks, and I would play guitar, and I'd play keyboards. I had a microphone back by my area too, and I could I could interact with the comedians, and it was a little bit different. One comedian I worked with, one of his shticks is that he always used rim shots. He'd tell a stupid joke, and I had my keyboard set up so that my hand was always there, and he had a special hand movement that he would do for a rim shot, and at any time he would do that, I was right there giving him his rim shot, and from there, I did 2 seasons with Caroline's Comedy Hour on the A&E network. We won an ACE award for my second season with the late great Richard Jenny, and worked with everybody there, people that went on to big names in sitcoms in the U.S. here.
Was it Caroline's Comedy Hour, Scott? What was your setup there? Because I have watched a couple of videos of that show, and I looked out for you, but I assume they had you crammed somewhere out the back or the side, because it seems like quite a small set. So how did that work?
Well, it was Caroline's Comedy Club was actually quite a big club, and they had me set up, what would be equivalent of stage right house left. I had a little island there. I had a Korg T2 synthesizer. That was a 73 note synthesizer. And then I had a Macintosh, again, loaded up with all my tracks. And I could call up whatever I wanted at any time, backing tracks or sound effects. And the T2 had actually a bunch of sound effects in it already, so I could use those. And I also had a little Roland box that had some real sound effects like telephones and birds and other things. And we'd rehearse all day long. Sometimes they'd give me assignments. I'd make the sequences in the afternoon, and we'd shoot that night.
Wow!
So it was a fun thing, and I played guitar in that too.
No, that's amazing. And then I know from that you went into a stint in radio, which is sort of it makes sense going from that sort of theatrical live environment to radio, where it still can be somewhat spontaneous. What did you learn in the radio environment that you hadn't probably picked up prior to that?
I was very lucky that the comedy club that we worked in, because it was so outrageous, there was a radio station called WLUP in Chicago, which is notorious in Chicago for being completely, in the comedy world, out, no limits, no holds barred. And the number one guy in the morning, Kevin Matthews, would come into the club, and then he asked me to start coming into his show. And I'd bring my keyboard, and I'd sit there, and I'd do live music, sound effects, play with musical guests that would come in, tons of stuff like that. And from there, one day, one of our guests was Morton Downey Jr. Remember him? The crazy guy with the cigarettes and getting in your face, kind of a political guy. And he saw what I was doing, and after the show, he said, "Would you like to come and work for me on my show?" And he was getting back into radio, and it didn't conflict with WLUP, so they let me do it. So I would be on 5 a.m. to 10 a.m. on the loop, and then I'd go home and then come back downtown for 4 o'clock through 7 o'clock.
Wow.
With Nationwide with Mort with a keyboard, but Mort had this crazy reputation as being this madman with the cigarettes and the being mean. He was the nicest guy on two legs, and boy, did he know he could improvise. He could do anything on the spot. He was a terrific performer. I mean, that bad guy thing was all an act, 100% act. But the timing, learning from him was just amazing. You can learn things, and a painting artist can learn from a musician. A musician can learn from a dancer. A dancer can learn from a writer. if you're smart and if you've got your eyes and ears open and if the antennas are up in the right way, you learn from other arts. And I've always been pretty perceptive in that way. Through no effort of my own, it's just natural.
Which has obviously paid off, Scott. I'm really interested, you're talking about the spontaneity and the need to be able to cover a whole range of both sounds and songs and playing full songs with guests. You mentioned your organ lessons and that. Are you a sight reader or you're just an amazing by-ear player or a bit of both?
Well, the deal is I was in the theater pipe organ. And back in the late 1920s, when there were silent movies, those organists rose from the pit and played to the movie, and they made it all up as they went along. It was all improvisation. And as being a theater organ guy, I studied that. I saw the greats, there was still a lot of great theater organists, and watching silent movies and watching and listening to how they did things with sound effects and, again, timing. To go and work with comedians, it was the same thing. It was like working with the silent movie. So I had a little bit of an advantage. I would look for bits to get in there, and sometimes you're looking for places to lay out, because sometimes what you don't play is important as what you do play. But it served me real well in the comedy world. And to this day, there's still some comics that I work with. I produce records, and the number one news program in the morning here in Chicago call on me sometimes to do crazy stuff for them. So I'm still in that racket, not as much as I was anymore, but I'm still in it.
And still obviously loving it, which is great. I do want to take a sidestep into pipe organ and theatre organs, because it is an area that I'm fascinated by, and I know a lot of our viewers and listeners are as well. So we'll probably move into the Radio City stuff in a minute as well. But my understanding is the behemoths of organs in America, the number one and two are, there's one at Atlantic City and then there's the Macy's pipe organ. I assume, have you been to have a look at either of those?
I have not. The organ in Atlantic City is a 7-manual, 645 rank mid-Merloche. And I've never been there. I've got actually a friend in Atlantic City who knows the people there, and he says that when I get to Atlantic City, I can get over there. And which Macy's is closing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that used to be called Wanamaker's.
That's right.
But that is the largest fully working. The one in Atlantic City is not 100% working, but the one in the Wanamaker's Macy's store is working. That's not a theater organ. It's called an orchestral organ. It's got theater pipes in it, and it can play some theater organ music, but it's an orchestral organ. It's more for classical music.
Yeah.
And program music. But theater pipe organ is a little bit different.
Yeah, and I don't want you to think I'm educated. We've just had a guest on, Anna Lapwood, who plays orchestral organs and classical music, and she mentioned Wanamaker's and Atlantic City, and she plays the Royal Albert Hall organ all the time. And
there you go.
Amazing pieces. So let's talk Radio City. I've had the privilege of doing a tour of Radio City a couple of years back. Amazing venue, iconic venue. Tell us what it's like. I know you've played there, what that was like, and maybe segue into your fun times where things didn't go so well.
When I got my first organ at home in 1961, my grandfather gave me a copy of Ashley Miller playing the Radio City Music Hall pipe organ, which was a 4-manual, 45 rank Wurlitzer, the largest Wurlitzer pipe organ ever built. Wurlitzer was the greatest maker of theater pipe organs. And my grandfather pulled me aside in my kitchen, I'll never forget it, and he said, "You see this here? This is the greatest organ in the world in the Radio City Music Hall in New York City." Because when you get to play that organ, you're going to know you made something of yourself. I won't be there, but I know you're going to get there. That was 1961. Now, in 1989, somewhere around there, Judy Tenuta calls me and says, Shadrach, we're going to go play Radio City Music. Boom! You know, I said, I got to play the organ. And so I called my connections in the theater organ world because I had made a few. And sure enough, they said I had to hire the organist at Radio City because of union rules. But they said, yes, you can come. You know, I had proper, references and stuff, and got there. And so I was going to play the organ at Radio City Music Hall. And so now I'm going to go into my story of what happened. So what a lot of people don't know is that there are two secret staircases on the side of Radio City of the auditorium where the Rockettes, the girls who kicked their legs, could open a secret door that was built into the wall and walk down these steps, and it looks like they were drifting down. The way, it was a pretty cool stage set. And because the organ at Radio City comes out of a slider, there's no way to get to it. You have to, either it's behind a curtain, and either you have to be there before the show starts or you have to sneak your way in there. So they told me that's what I had to do. I went up the secret staircase, down, and got behind the curtain, waiting for my cue. Now, I must say that we opened up for Suzanne Vega. Radio City Music Hall was sold out, 5,500 seats, a packed house, sold out at Radio City Music Hall. Now, I played a lot of pipe organs, before Radio City, but I sat down at the console, and wow, this console looks just like the one at Radio City. And there's my grandfather's face right here. You made it, kid. You're there. You're there. And not only are you there, you're there in front of 5,500 people. You're going to start the show to a sold-out house at Radio City Music Hall. I've never had stage fright in my life, except for that day. And because my grandfather was there, and it's like, he called it. Here I am. But I shook it off. So now, the organist told me the console's huge. And you ever see those buttons like in a warehouse to open up a garage door? It's a box. It's got a red button up here, a black button here, and a green button down there. It might be the other way around down in Australia.
Right.
Australian joke.
Yeah, we're all upside down. Yep.
Anyway, so there was one on this side of the console underneath the keyboard and one on this side. Now, the organist said, you hit this one first, that opens the curtains, and then you hit this one. You couldn't hit them at the same time because it was too wide. You hit this one, and that will send the console out on the slider. Whatever you do, don't press that one first. You're going to press that one first. So anyway, I hear my cue. I'm thinking about my grandfather. I hit this one first. Now, the console started all, Jesus, and there's chains at the bottom of the curtain to keep the curtain flat. And then I open the curtain, and the curtain opens slowly. The console's going out. It hits me in the back of the head, and I didn't get hurt, but that got a laugh, so it was okay. That wasn't the bad part. So Judy's walk-on music was Exodus, theme from the movie Exodus. Da 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 da. Very pageantry. And the idea was, I'm going to play Exodus, and now on the other side of Radio City, that the secret door that I walked out, Judy's going to walk out on that side, and the spotlights are going to hit her, and she's going to walk, and it leads right to the stage, and we start our part of the show. So I come out blazing through the curtains, ba da bum da da, ba da 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 da. Now the 5 Super Troopers like Close Encounters, zang, go over and where the door is. And Judy's supposed to walk out the door, but she doesn't. Ba-da-da-da-da-da. I get another couple bars into it, and the lights go out, and I stop. I start it again. Ba-da, spotlight comes on me. Da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da. Zang, spotlight's on the door. No Judy.
Wow.
Now, this happens another 3 times. I turned around and looked at the audience. Judy's arguing with her manager behind the door for some reason. And she says, I'm not going out. I'm not. Let Shadrach play the organ for our time. Let him, he likes to play the organ. Let him play the organ. I'm not going out. F you. I'm not going to play. I'm not going to do my show. Well, the manager said, oh, yes, you are going to do the show. He opens the door and throws her out. And she kind of comes out, almost falls over the side, which would have, from the second floor, that would have been good. And so finally, Judy walks down the steps, and we do our show. But that was because I'm like, there's 5,500 people there, and I'm like, what do I do now? I can't communicate with them, you know. So the show had a chance to go sliding into hell in a flaming chariot of you know what, but it didn't. So, and that's my favorite bad time on stage.
That is absolutely amazing. Now, I've got 2 questions that come out of that. So you were able to press the button to open the curtain after you'd gone through it, and it did sort of come out around you. So it did. I was worried that the curtain might actually drag you off your stool as it opened. So that's good.
No, but when I did it, I go, oh. So, I mean, I was on a bench, and it didn't knock me off the bench because I was ready for it. And the curtain, by the time it got to me, the curtain was halfway open, so it just came up over the organ. But I was afraid it was going to scratch the organ. And then, well, Mr. Meyer, you've got a $7,500 bill because we got to refinish the greatest Wurlitzer Theater pipe organ ever built.
Yeah, that's right. And roughly what year was this, Scott?
Let's call it 89.
So, Susan, my second question is, who the hell, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but who the hell booked Judy Tenuta as a support for Suzanne Vega? I can't imagine for a minute any member of Suzanne Vega's audience was expecting that as a support act.
Suzanne was a big Judy Tenuta freak.
There you go.
She loved Judy Tenuta. And Judy was big in New York. I mean, we played Caroline's, in 3 different locations. They moved the club a couple of times, and Judy was very, very popular in New York. She was on Howard Stern all the time, and she was actually, for being a Chicago gal, she was very, she had a New York thing to her. New York people really liked her because she was, she was bigger than life,
and she absolutely deserved the support. She absolutely deserved the support slot, Scott. It was more Suzanne, and I'm a massive Suzanne Vega fan. My perception of Suzanne Vega during the 80s was she was a very, serious is not the word I'm looking for, but a very, introspective artist. Yep. And I just imagine all these people in berets and serious artistes turning up to Radio City Music Hall and going, well, this is not what I expected.
Well, you wouldn't believe it, but Judy's audience was very wide.
Yeah, there you go.
And I found, if you look at Monty Python was those guys were all intellectuals, and they were as absurd as you could possibly get. And Judy was absurd in her own way, and she had a lot of fans that were smart people.
Yeah, I love it. No, that's amazing. Amazing story, Scott. Thank you for that. That's just absolute gold.
My pleasure.
And so while we're talking about organs, you've had a long-standing, obviously, love of Hammonds and then an actual more formal involvement with Hammond. Tell us about your love of Hammond organs specifically and how they've sort of assisted you throughout your career.
Well, Hammond USA Hammond organ is owned by Suzuki Musical Instruments of Hamamatsu, Japan. And that's a whole long story. Mr. Suzuki, Manji Suzuki, rescued the company. Actually, it was owned by a guy from Australia for a while. And God bless him, don't get mad at me, but he did not do a great job with the company and kind of drove it into the ground. And Mr. Suzuki bought it with the idea of remaking the B3. That was his entire goal, to do it. Found out that, the original Hammond organ was an electromechanical instrument with thousands and thousands and thousands of parts. And to rebuild it and remarket it, it would have a six-figure price tag. So he said, I'm not going to do that. Let's learn how to do it digitally. And he got his engineers to start working on it. And started making digital organs. And the American division, Hammond organ, was begun in Chicago by Lawrence Hammond in 1934. And so it's the USA headquarters is in suburban Chicago. And I used to go there and hang out. The guys were real nice, and I'd go there and I'd play the organ, and we'd go out for lunch, and, it was a pretty good camaraderie. And after a while, they said, well, wait a minute, you're here all the time. Here's a desk and a small check. Take care of our artists. And so they made me the artist liaison. We had about 5 artists when I started, and now I've got 300 and I just got a new guy today, 352 artists.
Wow.
And we've got the greatest of the greatest. Keith Emerson was one of our guys, Rick Wakeman, Rod Argent, Greg Rowley from Santana and Journey, the music director of Billy Joel, all the gospel guys, country guys. I mean, the list goes on, and we're adding to it all the time. People who play Hammond organ, and I play Hammond organ. I work for the company because I play Hammond organ. It's not the other way around. I'm not a shill, and I'm not if I found something else that worked better than a Hammond organ, I'd play that, because I don't want to, nothing gets in the way of my music. But I have not found anything yet that beats the Hammond organ. And I do have a Mellotron, but that's not a competition. But, so we're a small crew in Chicago, but we help with the design of the organs, and we've got a lot of input, in programming the organs and in development. And, we work with Japan very closely, to make these instruments, and, they're fantastic instruments, and we still do make the B3, but only as digital, and have to wait.
Yes,
but,
which is a benefit. Scott, I honestly had no awareness that you were the artist liaison person at Hammond. I obviously didn't do my research that well, so I understand there is stuff you won't be able to talk about. Totally get that. But what is the skill set required to do artist liaison? Because that's another unique sort of skill.
Well, my mother was a people person. I'm a people person, and I know not to bother big stars. I've got their phone numbers and their addresses and some of their credit cards, but I don't bother them. No. And it's hard. It's hard, when you're hanging around the Zombies and Rod Argent, or and Keith Emerson or Rick Wakeman. You just want to, you have to temper being a fanboy, and, but some of the guys I've become very, very close with, like Mark Stein from the Vanilla Fudge, who was one of my original heroes. Mark calls and says, hey, it's my cool friend Mark. And then every once in a while I go, it's the guy from the Vanilla Fudge. Yeah. And, and he just looks at me and, well, we'll keep it clean. But he uses a word, stop it, stop being a fanboy. I can't help it. But then he'll sit there and he'll tell us stories about that, the album Band of Gypsies by Jimi Hendrix, one of the classic albums of all time. Mark was in the dressing room with Jimi Hendrix, just Mark and Jimmy, right before that show, and Mark walked Jimmy up to the stage. Then Jimmy went on the stage and did the Band of Gypsies concert.
Yeah.
And this is my buddy, you know.
It's got to be a few pinch me moments there, Scott. And it probably segues beautifully to a standard question we ask every guest, which is tag a keyboard player. And I can't think of anyone better qualified to call out someone that's inspired them, given your role at Hammond. But is there a keyboard player you would love to hear more about their career if you had the opportunity to hear it?
This is going to sound self-serving or something, but I've gotten to meet all my heroes. To the point where I'm friends with most of them. My all-time keyboard hero of all times was Michael Pinder of the Moody Blues, the Mellotron player of the Moody Blues, because I could not see how one man could sit down and make a symphony orchestra. I didn't even know what a Mellotron was. And so I followed Mike, and I was a huge Moody Blues fan. And through it had nothing to do with Hammond organ. This was before I worked for Hammond organ. Through a very strange, one of those, I got to be friends with Mike, and his wife and his kids. I stayed at his house. I was in the studio, and Mike was a guru. I've had 3 gurus in my life. Mike was one of them. Dr. Lonnie Smith. We can talk about Dr. Lonnie Smith if you wish. And then a fellow by the name of Colonel Bruce Hampton, who was the paterfamilias of the jam band scene here in the United States. But, Rick Wakeman, I've had many conversations with Rick and Keith and Rod Argent.
Yeah.
And of course, Mark and Felix Cavalieri from the Rascals. By the way, if the Rascals come anywhere near you, if they tour, I don't know if they're going to go to Australia or not, but anybody who's watching this over the world, if the Vanilla Fudge or the Rascals come anywhere near you, go to see them, or because they're just fantastic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, brilliant picks there, Scott. I really appreciate that. They're amazing. And while we've already covered off the train wreck, but just ignoring what your current rig is with the Ides of March, and aside from Hammond organs, what are some of the favourite keyboards? Mellotron sounds like it's your go-to outside of Hammond.
Well, as far as the sounds, the instrument that I play is a completely digital instrument. A mellotron, for those who don't know, a mellotron was invented in the late 40s in America. It wasn't called mellotron. It was invented by a guy named Harry Chamberlain in L.A. And he got this idea of making a machine that used pieces of magnetic tape, like from a tape recorder. And he would have C, C sharp, D sharp, E of violins playing. And then he made an apparatus with a keyboard that would play those tapes. And you'd have violins or trumpets or French horns or whatever. And what a lot of people don't know is that those original tapes were members of the Lawrence Welk Orchestra.
Oh, wow.
That he recorded in his garage with his son. And then a guy, they were looking for some place where they could get 37 playback heads for magnetic tape on one piece of metal that would fit in there. They couldn't find that. And there was a place in England called Streatley Electronics that built parts for tape recorders. So they went there, and this guy, Bill Franzen, took took two Chamberlains from L.A. to Birmingham, England, where Streatley was. And here's where the story gets a little weird, because for some reason, Harry Chamberlain only patented his instrument in the United States, not a worldwide patent. And Bill Franson, who was a salesman, took these two instruments to England and showed the guys from Streatley Electronics what they said, what are you going to do with 37 things? Well, we're got this musical instrument. Here it is. Well, they saw it and saw that it wasn't patented in the United States, and they built the first mellotron. And they started a company called Mellotronics, and they started building that instrument in England. And of course, this was, by the time it got to, it was in the early 60s, Graham Bond, the great British organist, was the first guy to put one on a record, and Katie barred the doors. Then all the British acts start using mellotron, and the mellotron became what it is. And eventually, Mellotronics had to, when Harry Chamberlain found out about this, he was like, well, wait a minute, that's my idea. I've got it patented here. And there was a lot of whatever. Mellotron had to pay Harry Chamberlain a royalty for having that idea, and Harry Chamberlain never got popular with what he did here. But it's a big long story to get back to your original question. What do I use? I use the original three violins, which was a Chamberlain instrument that was copied into Mellotron. I use the flutes. I use the choir. I use there's a beautiful Chamberlain tenor sax I use on the Mellotron. Very haunting sound. What else? Oh, sometimes the brass, which doesn't sound like brass. And the brass is what you hear at the beginning of Watcher of the Skies by Genesis. The brass is in there a lot. So those are the Mellotron sounds I use.
There you go, Tees. No, that's amazing. Thank you. And then before we get on to the Desert Island Discs, I love the quote on your website, which is always trust a fat man when it comes to food. So, and you can tell your comedy background, because I did laugh when I read that. So tell us about your involvement with Yelp, and because I think you're one of the most prolific reviewers and so on. Tell us a little bit. I just thought it was really interesting and worth a quick chat.
I discovered Yelp, and I use it to practice my writing. I'm also a professional writer when I can get work. Anybody out there watching, I'll give you my website. But I use it to practice my writing, and I try to be clever with my reviews. And I'm not one of these guys who just gets toffee-nosed and hates everything. If it's miserable, I'll say it. But I don't get vicious. But I try to put some life and some vif in my writing. And whenever I go somewhere, somewhere new, I always Yelp it, and so I've got hundreds of reviews now, and I've been Yelp Elite for the past 3 years. Which you don't ever go into a restaurant and say, "Hey, I'm a Yelper." You don't do that, But it's fun to write like that, and it stirs the mind, and so. That's why I do it and continue to do it. And so I'm Scott M, qzq.yelp.com, and that'll get you to my pages. And the one thing I don't do that a lot of people do is I don't put pictures in my reviews.
Yeah, okay.
Which I should. They want me to do it, but I don't do it. but it's very fun, and especially if you go to a place that's really good. I always comment about the decor and the service. If there's and if it's really bad, I can tell you the worst review I've ever done, and I can tell you the whole thing right now because you'll see it's only a few words. I went to a steakhouse that was horrible, and that's horrible with a capital H. And my entire Yelp was, "There's a White Castle down the street. Eat there instead."
Now, for non-US listeners, White Castle, it's
White Castle are sliders.
That's right. Yeah.
Sliders has become has entered the popular vernacular for meaning a small hamburger. I mean, tiny burger.
That's right.
In the U.S. here, it was one of the first fast food joints, and they're called sliders. Boy, there's a lot of onions on them. Onions throw glycerin, and if you eat enough of them, you have sometimes a tendency to make repeated visits to the smallest room in your house.
Laxative
Was that
effect.
tactful?
Yeah, no, that was very tactful. Yeah, I'm from a nursing background, Scott, so as soon as you mentioned glycerin, I went, okay, laxative effect.
That's the White Castles. They've been around, and they used to be open 24 hours, and at least in Chicago, they've got a reputation as the place you go to, and 2:00 in the morning when you're thoroughly pissed out of your head and you want something to eat. You go 2:00 in the morning to White Castles. A lot of people have never been to a White Castle sober. I'm not that person.
Love it.
So that was my worst Yelp I ever had.
So here's my feeble attempt at a segue, Scott. So going from food to not having a lot of food and living on a desert island, let's talk about your desert island discs. What are your 5 go-to albums if you have to pick them? Beautiful. This
is probably boring, but the first 2 would be the Red and Blue Beatles Greatest Hits. I believe it's thoroughly impossible to become bored with the Beatles. And the range of music on those, they're 2 double albums, so I'm kind of cheating. But I'm considering the double album as one album. The Red and the Blue Beatles, the 64 to...
That's right.
66 to 68. Boy, if you can't find something to listen to on those, I can't help you, So that's number 1. Number 1 and 2. Number 3 would be Miles Davis Milestones. Great jazz album. You never get sick of it. Yeah. And I mean, when you're talking about desert island discs, that's what you're talking about. Stuff that you never, ever get sick of. And If you hear a song from those albums, you don't go, "Oh, turn that crap off." Oh no, I turned it up. I want to hear that. So Miles Davis Milestones. My 4th would be the album Breathe by Dr. Lonnie Smith.
Yeah.
Dr. Lonnie, again, I've been so lucky to be in the right place at the right time. Doctor was the last of the great jazz organists.
Mm.
And he was a very, very loyal member of the Hammond family, and he embraced all of us artists. He was like the guru, and he taught us about ego. He taught us about not being too full of yourself. He taught us about how to be in a band with your fellow man. He taught us how to behave. He taught us so much. It was a brilliant, but very heartfelt man. Yeah. And his music live was absolutely riveting and electric. And we'd go to see him. He'd come into town. I'd pick him up and come and play the jazz showcase. And everybody would crowd into the jazz showcase, which is not a big club. And he'd play his set, and afterwards we'd all walk to the back of the room with this look on our face.
Yeah.
Completely gobsmacked, stunned, speechless. And we all look at each other and go, what did we just see here?
Yeah.
What was that? You know, and just to try to digest it. And he was in his final years, his path of experimenting with the organ trio, he picked his musicians that he worked with incredibly. Jonathan Kreisberg, Jonathan Blake on drums, just unbelievable. You'd go to see them. Sometimes you'd think you'd be listening to a blues fatback trio. Sometimes you'd think you were listening to Yes or King Crimson, which a lot of jazz guys don't go there. Doc did. And his path was just the creativity, just he never stopped, and he just wouldn't go. Then he got sick.
Yeah.
And his mind was absolutely crystal clear and precise to his last day.
Yeah.
But his body failed him. And he was fearless. And then his body died, but he's still with us.
Mm.
And if I sound like a Mooney or a cult member, I guess I am, but it's a benevolent, happy, productive cult. And, his voice we hear constantly. And I was very lucky to have been part of his life. And, so Dr. Lonnie's album Breathe on Blue Note Records is number 4. And then the 5th one is completely out of left field, and this is Modern Pipe Organ by Buddy Cole, which to me is one of the greatest theater pipe organ records ever made. And, again, we got rock and roll guys listening here. It was on Warner Brothers Records, and it's the most incredible sounding pipe organ record that was ever made in theater pipe organ. And people tried to, all the theater organists said, why can't we get anything that sounds like that? And until I told them, I says, you know what? They were on Warner Brothers Records, where the Grateful Dead was, where Hendrix was. No, Hendrix was, No, wait a minute. He wasn't on Warner Brothers. But there were a bunch of great rock and rollers on Warner Brothers, and they had their mastering people. And they'd get the tapes, and they'd master it like a pop record. And that's why it sounded like that. And I can't tell you how many times with theater organ guys, I said, look, take your records to a rock and roll guy to get it mastered, because it's the same thing. It's a huge sound, huge bass, huge sound. That's you got to know what you're doing to master a record to sound like that. And I've been thanked. The microphone that I'm talking to you on, this is an Audio Technica 4105. It's a very expensive microphone, and a theater organ guy, after I gave him that tip, gave me this microphone.
There you go.
I'm speaking to you on right now.
No,
as gratitude for helping him to get his mastering together.
No, that's a great tip. No, and thanks for that beautiful tribute to Dr. Lonnie as well. And just, I hadn't planned on asking this, but in your role at Hammond or more broadly, did you run across Joey DeFrancesco as well, who's obviously someone else that we lost recently that was a huge loss?
Joey, what a character. Joey was a dear friend, dear friend. I got to jam with him any number of times. I'll tell you a funny story. I said, always trust a fat man when it comes to food. And Joey was a man he was a bigamon. He was a man of tremendous girth. So the M show, our Japanese executives took us out to dinner for sushi. About 25 of us at a big, long table. So Joey and I and his band were at one end of the table. All the grown-ups were at the other end of the table. So Joey and I start ordering sushi. Now, all of a sudden, here comes a bunch of sushi that we didn't order. And that's when we found out that the boss, Mr. Suzuki, at the end of the table, the custom is that he orders for the table. So we had double ordered the sushi. And I don't know if you've ever seen the thing on Lucille Ball on I Love Lucy a million years ago, where Lucy and Ethel are working in a candy factory, and there's candy coming out on a conveyor belt, and a conveyor belt's going too fast, and they're shoving the candy in their mouth because they're supposed to wrap it up. Well, this was Joey and I when we see all the sushi coming that they ordered at the beginning of the table, plus all the stuff that we ordered, and this wasn't at a cheap joint. This was at a high-end sushi joint. I'm going to have a $500 bill, because once Mr. Suzuki at the end of the table sees that we ordered all the sushi, and we fessed up and went to him. Man, the two big fat guys double ordered the sushi. It's not a good optic.
No, but I love it.
But in the end, we did manage. We didn't waste anything. We didn't throw anything under the table.
Good.
But we told them cancel the rest of our order. But we went to Mr. Suzuki and said, we didn't know that you ordered the sushi for us, and we ordered. Don't worry, it's okay. But yeah, Joey was a dear friend, tremendous player. Got to hear him with Pat Martino, and he always had a great band. And lots of moments, off stage and just hanging out and having a good time, having a cocktail and talking about jazz. To have the kind of proximity to an artist like that, boy, you can't buy that.
No, you can't.
And, so yeah, Joey was a great guy, and what he did for the Hammond organ is just can't be duplicated. We're talking about Dr. Lonnie Smith. I was at the NAMM show once, and Doc was just playing. And I've told this story so many times to so many people. They might think it's the only story that I have, but I love this story so much, and I think when you hear it, you'll love it too. So Doc's playing, and up walks one of our dealers with his daughter. So Doc looks at her, and, Doc with the turban, and he's got the Jedi eyes. She's watching him intently, and he goes, do you play? And the little girl says, yes. And Doc says, would you play for me? And the little girl says, oh, no, I'm not very good. Doc stops and looks at her with those Jedi eyes and says, not very good. Do you love it? And she goes, oh, yes, sir, I do. Doc goes, well, you're already one of us. How old are you? 14. 14 years old? He goes, you probably aren't very good. He goes, I wasn't very good when I was 14, but you're going to get good because you love it. Now I'm standing there and I'm watching this, and the tears are falling from my eyes, because where do you see such heartfelt wisdom and such incredible, so few words, but such a powerful message? When I started as the artist liaison, I wouldn't even touch an organ around the greatest musicians that I commiserate with the greatest of the greatest of the great. And I wouldn't even touch an organ. I wouldn't even do anything. And then when Doc said that, do you love it? You're already one of us. It was like the weight that came off of my shoulders. And that's what the tone of our artist program, and it's really been infectious, because keyboard players have a horrible reputation of being egotistical and know-it-all. And it's because we're more educated and better than everybody else. But no, I'm just kidding.
And Scott, I think there'd be a lot of people throughout your career that have found their proximity to you priceless as well. It's been amazing talking to you about what is still an ongoing and very flourishing career. But, your insights have been amazing, and I can't thank you enough for sharing them.
Well, thank you for giving. I mean, it's always hazardous to give me a public bully pulpit, and I managed not to swear.
And there we have it. As I alluded to prior to the show, I mean, what a career Scott's have. Maybe it's just me that has a fetish for theatre organs, but I somehow think that's not the case, given our huge audience out there. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did speaking with Scott. So, yeah, again, can't thank Scott enough for his time. It was absolute gold. And I'd like to thank you for giving us your time as always. We do truly appreciate it. It's not insignificant to give up half an hour, or however long you listen to of each episode. We do hugely appreciate it. We also appreciate our gold and silver supporters. So first, the musicplayer.com forums. If you want a great space, well-moderated space to talk keyboard, synthesizer playing more broadly, then musicplayer.com forums is the place to go. Mike and the team at midnightmastering.com, again, hugely valued provider to me personally with my own music output. Can't recommend their mixing mastering services highly enough. And Tammy, the lovely Tammy Catcher from Tammy's Musical Stew. Thank you, Tammy, for your ongoing support. And Mr. Derry Evans from the lovely country of Wales, who's an ongoing supporter as well. And do check out Derry's interview in a previous episode. It's absolutely fascinating as well. Again, thank you. I'll leave it there. Please do keep in touch. We are on all the socials, including Blue Sky and Facebook and Instagram. Where you name them, we're on them. We are on Substack. We'd love your support either via Patreon or Substack. In regards to our Substack, we actually provide written, edited and curated transcripts of our interviews. So if you love a read rather than a listen, we're building up a nice library of interviews there. It's slow but sure, but for a couple of bucks a month, it's well worth thinking about, as is our Patreon, because we do provide early access to parts. We'll give you early access to like a heads up on future guests and the ability to ask questions of guests and so on. So do consider that, the Patreon/Keyboard Chronicles. I'll shut up now. Look forward to seeing you next episode. And in the meantime, keep on playing.